अस्सलाम वालेकुम नाज़रीन, आप देख रहे हैं प्रेसिंग इश्यूज़ डॉक्टर असरद बुखारी के साथ। और बहुत से लोग ये कहते रहे, मुझे फीडबैक किया कि जी प्रोग्राम अंग्रेज़ी में किया जाए, उर्दू आप बहुत मुश्किल बोल रहे हैं। तो जी आज का प्रोग्राम अंग्रेज़ी में होगा क्योंकि हम बात करें पाक अमरीका ताल्लुकात के बारे में। और हमारे साथ होंगे सीनियर एसोसिएट साउथ एशिया वुडरो विल्सन सेंटर मिस्टर माइकल कुगलमैन, पॉलिटिकल एनालिस्ट हैं। बड़ी उनकी गहरी नज़र है पाकिस्तान पे। मोस्ट ऑफ यू आर गोना गेट योर विशेस ग्रांटेड टुडे। यू हैव बीन राइटिंग इन एंड यू हैव बीन सजेस्टिंग दैट द पाकिस्तानी political and state affairs should be discussed on this show in English, because a lot of you couldn't understand Urdu despite being British-born Asians. Well, your wish is granted today because we're talking to someone from the United States, and obviously his Urdu isn't great, I assume, so we should be conversing in English. Hi Mike, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. How are you?
Awesome. Yeah, not bad. How are you? How's the weather your end tonight?
Very nice, an unusually warm day here in Washington.
All right, okay, that's amazing. Mike, I keep following your Twitter account and see all the abuse that you get from Pakistanis, joys of the job. But considering the fact that you guys put sanctions on Iran and that let India buy fuel from Iran, can you understand where Pakistanis are coming from?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it looks bad. It's certainly hypocritical. I've always been a proponent of a more benign treatment of Iran. I think that putting sanctions on Iran is a terrible idea, and it's true that by giving India all these exemptions so that it can continue to trade in energy with Iran and so that it can build this Chabahar port, it certainly looks hypocritical, and it is, particularly because Pakistan didn't get any exemptions. But at the end of the day, you look at the U.S. relationship with India and you look at the U.S. relationship with Pakistan, and I think that really sort of helps understand why exactly the U.S. is making exemptions for some countries and not for others.
Yeah, I mean, the problem we have is that in the whole region, you get a democratic government and you get different ideas and you have peace treaties with Iran. And then Republicans come in and everything goes out of the window. Now, looking at your midterm election results, do you think Donald Trump would reconsider his approach to Iran at all?
No, unfortunately, he doesn't strike me as the kind of person that's going to let something as insignificant as a midterm election, in his view, affect the way that he thinks about these big issues. Now, certainly it's true that the House of Representatives is now controlled by the Democrats, which is a big change, but, that won't change the broader state of play with foreign policy. I mean, Trump is still the commander-in-chief. He'll still make all the big decisions on major policy issues, including Iran.
So, considering the fact that the relationship with India getting better by the day, or India is an ally, where do you see the US-Pakistan relationship, and where does it put Afghanistan, other than in peril, really?
Well, I mean, I think the U.S.-India relationship isn't as great as some may think, and the U.S.-Pakistan relationship isn't quite as bad as many think. I mean, there have been some tension points in U.S.-India relations over the last few months, particularly in terms of things that Trump has said. He's made some outrageous and insulting statements about India, which doesn't help the relationship. In terms of Pakistan, I think it's at a stalemate. I think that's the best way to describe it. I don't think it's necessarily going to get any worse, but I don't think it's going to get any better. But there is an opportunity. You mentioned Afghanistan. I think that for one of the first times in quite some time, the two countries do see very much eye to eye in terms of this fact that they both want to try to figure out how to launch a peace process with the Taliban to end the war. So there is an opportunity for cooperation in that regard. Of course, the problem is that the U.S. and Pakistan have very different ideas in mind as to what they would want an endgame to look like in Afghanistan.
Yeah, I mean, one of the big guys who was bridging between Taliban and United States and Pakistan, Maulana Samiul Haq, he was assassinated recently. How's that been seen in United States?
Well, I mean, it's seen as a really big deal, given how influential he was in this story, and particularly given his influence within the Taliban realm, so to speak. There certainly is a view that he could have some influence over a peace process. So the fact that he's now gone could make it all the more difficult to try to figure out how to launch a peace process. If you don't have a key interlocutor like him trying to encourage the key Taliban factions to come to the peace table, it's going to make the job even harder than it already is.
I mean, I'm considering the fact that from a lot of Pakistani people in their perspective, that even if there was an initiation of a peace process, you couldn't put it past President Trump that he comes back with another speech and suggests that there would be another surge in Afghanistan. There's a distinct lack of trust between the two governments, and such a lack of trust normally leads to a divorce rather than rebuilding the relationships. How do you see it?
Well, I mean, the trust deficit is not new, of course. It certainly is particularly acute right now, but there's been a trust deficit many times over the years. And, you know, I think it really comes down to the state of the war in Afghanistan. I think this is wrong, but this is how it is, that the U.S. tends to view Pakistan through the lens of Afghanistan. And if the U.S. were to somehow get a peace deal in Afghanistan, if the war were to end, or if the U.S. military were to pull out of Afghanistan, that, I think, could be an incentive for the U.S. government to essentially let the relationship with Pakistan wither away, which I think would be a mistake. But, you know, so long as the U.S. has some type of role in Afghanistan, it's always going to want to continue to work with Pakistan on the assumption that it can try to cooperate with Pakistan and get its help in Afghanistan, even though that's proved to be very difficult given the tensions in the U.S.-Pakistan relationship.
One of the very newly famous United States statement, Mr. Steve Bannon has been quoted saying that Imran Khan of Pakistan is somewhat similar to President Donald Trump. Do you agree with this statement?
That's interesting. I wasn't aware that Bannon had made that statement.
He said that while he was meeting his mates in Eastern Europe and congratulating them on their electoral success.
Isn't that something? Well, you know, I'll say this. You know, I've always been one of these people that pushes back against the analogy. It's tempting to make the analogy, given that you look at how they have somewhat similar politics, and they're both somewhat impulsive and mercurial and hard to predict. But quite frankly, I think that the main difference is that one of these gentlemen respects his political office and the other does not. And obviously it's Trump that does not have any respect for his political office. You know, the corruption that Trump is guilty of, it's so intense. And of course, you know, Imran Khan, you could fault him for what you'd like, but, you know, he's generally a clean official. So I don't think we should overplay that comparison. But that is so fascinating that Bannon made that comment. Thank you for revealing that.
Yeah, he did while he was in Europe. So there is a prisoner, right, a Pakistani prisoner in United States, Dr. Afia Siddiqui, who has written a letter to the Prime Minister appealing him to help her be released on humanitarian grounds. Do you think any progress can be made on that particular issue, considering that she's a cancer patient and probably doesn't have long to live anyways?
Yeah, and I know this is a very big concern in Pakistan, as it should be. Quite frankly, I don't think anything is going to happen. There have been all kinds of rumors that Afia Siddiqui would be swapped for someone like, Shakil Afridi, or even now hearing Asia Bibi. I think that's highly, highly unlikely. As far as the U.S. government is concerned, and particularly the Trump administration, she's a terrorist. She's a convicted terrorist. And I think that given that is how she is viewed by the U.S. government, I can't imagine that she would be swapped, so to speak, or freed, or transferred into the custody of Pakistan. To me, it seems highly unlikely. But then again, Trump is, if nothing else, a transactional guy. He's always interested in deals, so we can't rule out some type of arrangement. And if there were something to happen, and if Dr. Siddiqui were to be returned to Pakistan, that would actually be a pretty big boost for U.S.-Pakistan relations.
Yeah, that probably would be. And coming to this blasphemy-related situation, I mean, I just want to see what the American point of view was, because from our perspective, the people who are protesting and doing a sit-in are also a very popular democratic entity with 2.1 million votes behind them. But how does America see the protests and the sit-ins that are going on since the verdict?
Well, I mean, you're right that these are clearly not exactly terrorists or anything like that are out there protesting in the streets. But here in the United States, they are seen as hardliners and as potentially dangerous and destabilizing hardliners, simply because of their viewpoints and the fact that the organization leading these protests last week in Pakistan has used a rallying cry of "kill all blasphemers," and so that's not particularly peaceful. So, I think it's encouraging that amid all this uncertainty about what Ms. Bibi's state is. There's rumors that she's left the country. There's rumors that she hasn't. It's been fairly quiet, as I understand it, and you haven't had these hardliners back out on the streets. So, obviously, it's just a very delicate situation. I imagine soon enough she will have left the country, and then the question will be how do these religious protesters react then? Do they come back out on the streets? Do they just sort of fade away?
I mean, I can understand if this narrative or perspective comes from Europe, but we're talking about a country where there's a lot of support for the Second Amendment, a lot of support in the political field and in the people for the laws to carry a gun. Couldn't the people of the United States understand that the blasphemy law is very much equivalent to the hearts and mind of people, to the gun laws in the United States, or to the Second Amendment? And it's something that even if it doesn't seem logical or reasonable to the people from outside, is something that's very, very close to the hearts and minds of Pakistanis.
No, you make a very good point. And, clearly most Americans don't understand Pakistan that well. And, they certainly don't understand the subtleties of the blasphemy law. They don't understand the sensitivities of it. And, they see these images of men in the streets, smashing baseball bats over pictures of Imran Khan and things like that. And they're going to think, oh, these guys must be doing the wrong thing. No, I don't mean to be candid like that, but most Americans don't understand the subtleties of Pakistan. But you're right. I mean, clearly it's a very delicate issue. It's a very delicate matter. And if I were to refer to these religious protesters in the streets in Pakistan as extremists, then certainly I would say the same thing about these right-wing conservatives here in the United States that are bigoted and attack Jews and Muslims and other minorities. So, I certainly acknowledge that there's a level of hypocrisy for an American observer or an American analyst to critique what's happening in Pakistan, given what this country is going through in this day and age.
I mean, looking at what just happened recently in California, fairly recently, you can understand that even the Democrats can't go against the gun laws in the United States, because that's like political suicide. And you guys should be able to understand that the Pakistani politicians feel the same when it comes to blasphemy law.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Again, I'm not going to dispute that. And my own view is that these gun laws are outrageous in this country, and they really need to be changed. But it's true that the National Rifle Association, which is the big lobby group for gun rights here, it has a stranglehold over the entire U.S. Congress to the point that reform cannot be discussed at all. And you're right, it's somewhat of a similar dynamic to what you have in Pakistan. It is apples and oranges. We're talking about guns, we're talking about religion. It's different. But yeah, I think that there are some comparisons that can be made.
Right. Okay. So one more thing. You must have heard of the mysterious case of the Israeli plane landing in Pakistan. Do you see, if Pakistan was to establish some sort of diplomatic ties with Israel, would that bring Pakistan any closer to the U.S. government, considering Jared Kushner is in there and, Israel has always been an ally to the United States?
Yeah, I wouldn't overstate that possibility. And of course, I'm not in a position to comment if there really was that Israeli plane in Pakistan. I really don't know.
Neither do I. Yeah.
But if we were to suspend our disbelief and assume that Pakistan and Israel were to move quite closer together, which, by the way, it wouldn't be the first time we've heard suggestions for that to happen. I don't see why that would have an impact on U.S.-Pakistan relations, given that for the U.S., the major concerns would still be in place. The fact that you have Pakistan not taking action against the terrorist groups, the terrorists in Pakistan that the U.S. wants to take action against. If you have a better relationship between Pakistan and Israel, that calculus is not going to change.
Awesome. Right. Yeah, going back to Pakistan again and the financial issues that we are facing. So we've been to Saudi Arabia. We've got some money out of there. We're hoping to get some money out of China as well. But we still need to go to the International Monetary Fund. How do you see the American 16.4% vote playing in that situation?
Yeah, it's a good question. And, in fact, negotiations with the IMF have started. They've been going on over the last few days. And, the U.S. is the biggest donor to the IMF, which means it has a lot of influence there. Yeah. And there had been some interesting signals sent by the Trump administration several months ago that, the U.S. would try to pressure the IMF to ensure that Pakistan could not get any money to pay back debts to China. I don't think that we would have to worry about that. I think what the U.S. should do is something that's, I think, wholly uncontroversial, but still something that would really help, and that's that the U.S. should insist that the IMF condition any new loan to Pakistan on Pakistan needing to rein in and restructure these public companies in Pakistan, which are, I would argue, perhaps one of the biggest reasons for Pakistan's debt crisis. Forget CPAC, forget Chinese loans. It's these public companies that are hemorrhaging debt, and I think that if that were to happen, that would be helpful. It would go a long way toward helping resolve an economic crisis that really threatens to become destabilizing.
Yeah, and do you think it was wise for the Foreign Secretary Pompeo to comment on that? I mean, financial issues. Should he even be commenting on that?
No, well, I think it was not a smart. It wasn't a good thing to do for many reasons. One, yes, I mean he deals with diplomacy and statecraft, not economics. But also, as I understand it, most of the loans coming into China right now, the repayment plans are such that Pakistan doesn't actually owe money. It doesn't need to start paying back. There's no deadlines coming up, at least for another decade. So I don't see why it's even relevant to be talking about preventing Pakistan from getting money that could be used to pay back China. I mean, Pakistan's immediate concerns are not paying back China. It's trying to deal with the debt in the public companies and some of these other the domestic debt in other contexts. So, I just think Pompeo's comments were not particularly advisable. They were fairly misguided and ultimately not very helpful.
And there's this new kind of situation where the Russians and the Chinese and the Turkish, they want to move away from the US dollar and they want to trade in their own currencies. From an American perspective, do you think they're being you guys are being isolated from the rest of the trading world? And do you think dollar is going to take a hit if that was to happen?
It was only logical, only natural that you'd have countries, that you'd have regional powers and other key countries trying to respond to this increasingly hostile U.S. trade policy with all of these new tariffs that have been imposed. So it makes perfect sense for the likes of Russia and China and Turkey to do these types of things, and for other countries to do things as well. Now, I'm not an economist, so I can't say this with certainty, but, the U.S. economy is actually still doing fairly well. So I think that just by virtue of having these countries band together and try to come up with their own arrangement, it's not necessarily going to have a negative impact on the U.S. economy. The bigger question is if other groupings, other countries try to do the same thing, and what happens over time in terms of the world trying to respond to U.S. policies with its trade and tariffs, and what effect that has. That remains to be seen.
So Pakistan and China, they have had this kind of conversation as well on this particular tour of Prime Minister Imran Khan, where they want to use their own regional currencies to trade. Moving forward, from an American's voter's perspective, such an aggressive foreign and monetary policy, do you think it's making President Trump more popular in the United States and we'll be dealing with these policies for years to come? Or do you think that there's going to be a shift towards Democrats and the policies will change in 3 years' time?
It's hard to say. It's too early. I think the results from this election the other day indicate that certainly there is a lot of unhappiness toward Trump, but at the same time, we haven't had this so-called blue wave that many had suggested, where you have all these Democratic gains. So I do think that if you say that this past election was a referendum on Trump, then I would suggest that the views on Trump are split, and that suggests that while some people simply are not happy with him, others are ready to give him the benefit of the doubt for another few years.
And if Trump was to, moving forward, when Trump contests elections, do Democrats even have someone who could give him a good challenge, a bit better than Senator Clinton?
Yeah, I think this is one of the big concerns on the part of the Democratic Party. There's no clear frontrunner to oppose Trump in the next election if he runs for re-election. You certainly have some names out there that have been thrown out, but no really big names. The only name that I've heard that I think could really be concerning for the Republicans is Joe Biden, interestingly enough, who had been vice president under Obama. There have been concerns that he was too old and wasn't interested in running. But he's been saying some things and making some very interesting statements lately to suggest that he could still be interested. And I think that someone like Biden, who comes from, working class family, blue collar guy, he could win over some of these conservative Republican voters as well. So I don't want to get ahead of the game, but that to me seems to be the only option. Otherwise, you're right. There really is no clear front runner to go up against Trump on the Democratic side.
Yeah, I mean, at times you miss your ex so much. You go back to her, but unfortunately, politics, you can't go back to Barack Obama. Otherwise, he could have been a good candidate to topple Donald Trump. Right, Imran Khan, since he's taken over the prime ministership of Pakistan, the premiership of Pakistan, he's been moving forward towards India. He's been sending peace messages, but there is absolutely nothing. They're not reciprocating at all. How does the United States see this state of affairs?
Yeah, I mean, the U.S. government has always been very emphatic about how it wants the India-Pakistan relationship to be smoother and better than it is now. So, I think that the U.S. takes a hands-off role. It's not going to be out there trying to push the two sides to work more closely together. And in part, that's because of the U.S.'s deepening relationship with India. India does not like any type of external mediator to get involved with the India-Pakistan relationship, which I think is a bit of a mistake. So I think that the U.S. government was certainly encouraged by some of these very encouraging noises coming from Imran Khan soon after he took office. But, I think that, to be quite candid, in the U.S. government, there's the view is that the Pakistani military really has control over policy toward India, and that no matter what may be said by Imran Khan rhetorically, the bottom line is that there is not going to be much of an interest to have much forward movement on the India-Pakistan relationship unless it entails opening up negotiations on the Kashmir issue, which is something that the Indian government, at least the current Indian government, is not interested in doing. So I think the view here is that, there's not going to be an expectation that things are going to get much better in the India-Pakistan relationship, despite the positive rhetoric coming from Imran Khan during his first few months in power.
Well, 20 minutes of conversation with you and everything looks bleaker than it ever did. Thank you so much for your time today. This was Mr. Michael Kugelmen. Thank you so much, Mike, for your time today. I shall try and put the link on your Twitter account so that you could receive a bit more abuse from Pakistanis as you're so used to by now. Thank you so much for your time today.
Oh, yeah, I could handle that. Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you. So, as you were listening to the views of Michael Kugelmen, who is one of the senior associates in the South Asia Woodrow Wilson Center, a political analyst, and keeps a very close eye on what goes on in South Asia, and particularly in Pakistan, very active on Twitter as well. So you might as well go and find him on Twitter and thank him or appreciate his views as I find, or if they're not what you think is the right thing to say, might as well. Twitter is open to abuse of a certain level, so if you fancy that, you probably can. He's very good at dealing with it, that's why I say so, and we thank him a lot for being here with us today. So this was Mr. Michael Kugelmen. You heard his views, and that was the American's perspective of what's going on in Pakistan. A very knowledgeable perspective, though. Probably a common citizen in the United States wouldn't know as much. प्रोग्राम अंग्रेजी में था जी. जिन लोगों को समझ में नहीं आया उनके लिए माजरत, और कोशिश करेंगे कि पाकिस्तान अमेरिका ताल्लुकात पे एक ऐसा प्रोग्राम भी अमेरिका से करें जो उर्दू में हो, ताकि जो लोग उर्दू समझते हैं उनको समझ आ सके. आज के लिए बस इतना ही. इजाज़त दीजिएगा. अल्लाह हाफ़िज़.